when we say who's in charge, we're usually wrong. When we killed Salami, for example, the commander of the military, we thought that would decapitate the IRGC. It didn't, because he's not in charge. The people who are actually in charge are not big names. They call them Sipahis or guardians that are in the background that are controlling a lot of this stuff, not for ideological reasons as their number one reason. It's more about economic control and wealth generation for their inner circle. If the Ayatollah left, I feel very little would change.
Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Eyes on Geopolitics. We've got a special one today. Of course, we're joined with Mick Mulroy, Jason Lyons, and a special guest, Jonathan Hackett. He's been on Eyes On and Team House before. Incredible episodes. Check them out for sure. He's wrote this great book, Iran Shadow Weapons, Covert Action, Intelligence Operation, Unconventional Warfare, and I think he's a perfect guest for what's been going on for a while, last week or so in Iran. Protests against the regime and stuff like that. They've seemed to turn violent over the last few days. The internet's been cut off countrywide. There's been a lot of reports, varying reports of how many people have been killed by the regime and stuff like that. It's all the way up to a couple thousand. They're saying that a lot of their hospitals are overrun with people with gunshot wounds and stuff like that. Jonathan has an intimate knowledge of what goes on in Iran and stuff, so I think he would have been a perfect guest for today. So thanks to me. Jonathan, what's up, man? How are you?
Good. How you guys doing? It's good to be here.
Good, man. Where do you guys want to start? You guys want to start basically on a TikTok on what went down, when, and how it all popped off?
Well, I could start with what I'm getting from media folks on the inside scoop, if you will, stuff that's not reported yet, and obviously of interest. So apparently, obviously, there's significant protests, over 70 cities. It appears that they have been identified as enemies of God now, which apparently in their lexicon means, open fire at will when it comes to the besieged and the IRGC. I think it's unknown how many have been killed, but I've seen reports as high as 1,000 plus. I don't think people know, but I think there's a new scrubbing mechanism that uses AI to go through social media to try to identify, more accurate numbers. But either way, it's really bad. And for the protesters, I should say, and for the regime, which is a good thing, of course. And I think Jonathan will get into all of the mechanisms that the regime has to stay in place. It's basically their main effort at all times, right? And they're just as concerned about their population, if not more so, than even external threats. The other big factor I would throw out there for discussion with the group is, and this is now reported, so this is public, is that the administration is reviewing potential military options to enhance the protests in Iran. I would assume, although I don't know, that there's already a pretty massive covert program going on. If not, there should be. I don't think that's the debate. I think the debate is whether they would use overt military efforts like strikes, potentially on IRGC facilities or something that's directly associated with the security forces that are oppressing the people. I heard, and I think this is somewhat in reporting, that the debate's between the White House and the State Department. So the State Department's kind of the mind that this won't help the protesters. It'll just potentially, give the regime an out to say this is all U.S. based, it's not real, etc. Hard to say that when it's extensive as it is, but they'll use it and potentially try to get people to rally around the flag, so to speak. And then I'm told that the White House has been very pleased with their use of military force in the second term to date, and that they are more inclined to use it. So there you go. Throw it back to you guys to hit those points. I think Jonathan would be great to really talk about what the regime does to keep itself in power, because he's written some excellent books on the topic, and I think, as you said, the perfect timing. And he's a Marine.
Yeah. Almost have our fire
team.
I
had to throw that out there. Yeah.
Lead with that.
Yeah. So it's day 15 of the protests. So that, as you're saying, Mick, it's very tough to know exactly how many are injured, how many are killed, how many have disappeared. And the problem there is that both sides benefit from whatever number they're using because it can satisfy different objectives based on what that number is. And that's similar in most conflicts and protests. So we probably will never really know exactly how many died in this protest or were arrested. Similar happened in the past. There's been about 10 different protests that have names that are very significant in Iran in the last 40 plus years. And this always is an issue of knowing how widespread is it, who actually is dying, who's doing the killing. Interestingly, in this particular protest, because they shut the internet off around 72 hours ago, the only media that's being released is being released by IRIB, which is it's the Islamic Republic of Iran Broadcasting, which is a state-owned and state-controlled IRGC-controlled news outlet. That's the outlet that's actually releasing images of morgues and warehouses and hospitals full of bodies, which is very interesting to consider. Why would the regime be doing that? And I think it's more about messaging to Iranians than it is about messaging to the world. And what they're probably trying to do is intimidate the people that are, once their internet actually gains some access, the first images they're going to see are images of their dead people. And I think that's probably the goal of what that is right there. And that's, again, the internet has been a weapon that the regime has been using recently. They used it in June against their own people. They actually shut the internet off when Israel and the U.S. were striking Iran. That wasn't the outside shutting them off. That was the regime shutting the people off from knowing what was going on, because fear is their weapon. I think it was Rage Against the Machine that said, like, fear is your only god on the radio. And I mean, it's really true. You can weaponize this feeling, which will maybe prevent some people from actually taking to the streets, because what the regime does not want is more people on the streets. Even if those people don't have weapons, they have voices and they have the ability, they have spending power. And in an economy that's damaged like the current Iranian economy, spending power is everything. And that's a huge point about who is actually protesting right now. If you look at, for example, in 2021, during the water shortage protests, or 2019, which they called Bloody Aban, which is when fuel prices had tripled, and I could name a bunch of other ones, there was usually a single segment of society protesting. For example, during the Masa Amini protests, it was a lot about human rights, women's rights. So there's a certain segment of society that's going to stand out there and protest. Right now, the significant news item is that it's not just one group, it's the Bazari merchants, which were actually the people that fueled the base for the regime to take power in 1979 in the first place. And that core element of their constituency is protesting against them. This is a huge change and has never happened since 1979. So that's a very interesting development.
Question for you on the internet, so we don't go past that, because I mean, they shut it down, but what about Skylink? Like, is there ability to override that? Does it take? And if you don't know the answer, I'm sorry if I'm putting you on the spot, but this is for everybody. Like, is that able to get through? Are they actually able to interfere with Skylink's ability to, provide the internet to the population in Iran, or and there's something we could do cyber-wise to affect that change?
Absolutely. So what you're talking about is basically a mesh network configuration, which Starlink is a branded version of a mesh network. I actually wrote a paper on this at Naval Postgraduate School, where you can create a mesh network to provide internet and basically circumvent a state-controlled internet system, which the regime actually imported the Great Firewall from China. China came in and actually, as a partnership, built Iran's internet infrastructure, which is what the regime is throttling right now. So they're able to filter almost 98% of internet traffic using this mechanism. But the regime has had a problem not just with mesh networks like you're talking about, but also with dishes on roofs. And if you see pictures of Tehran or any other major city, you just see roofs covered in satellite dishes, because the everyday people, they want to be able to reach out to the outside world, and they're using these parabolic antennas to do that. There are other ways as well, because even with the throttled internet, you can still get around it. There's two applications. One is called FreeGate and one is called Siphon. And both of these are used to get around the Chinese Great Firewall and Iran's what it's called National Internet Network, which is called the NIN. Both of these basically act as open web proxies that have these huge rotating server lists. They don't always work. Let's say it's like a 98% failure rate. But if you can get a 2% success rate on that, penetrating the filtered network, that's success, right? So if you couple that with a mesh network like Starlink, you could have some success. The problem with Starlink is it costs money. You're talking about a regime where the economy is completely controlled by the IRGC, and the people are protesting because they have no money. How are you going to
Well,
pay
that
for the
seems like it'd be a
bandwidth?
good investment on the U.S. government's part. Just throwing
That's
that out
exactly
there.
what I was getting at, is that if we're talking about covert support or even overt support, maybe that means paying, subsidizing Starlink temporarily to allow people access so they can go out and arrange protest movements.
Absolutely. And so the rest of the world, and I would say that we should stick to the covert side and not do direct overt strikes. I kind of agree with State on this. But one of the things we can do is amplify the organic nature of what's going on right now. And that's giving people the internet to put out there what's happening, you know? Hopefully that's the case. Hopefully, and I'm sure, there's smart people looking at this right now, how we can do that. But so you do think, Jonathan, there's a way around this attempt of the regime to basically put the country in the dark?
Yeah, I mean, it's going to affect most people because most people aren't sophisticated enough to figure out how to get around it. But there are other ways too. So I mentioned the filtering, anti-filtering, those two applications, FreeGate and Siphon. Then there's the mesh network, like you mentioned. And there's another way, which is if you're in the border areas like in Kurdistan or Abadan down in the south, if you're close enough to the Emirates or you're close enough to Iraq, you can use Korek, you can use Etisalat. These are the two other internet service providers that are in Iraq and the Emirates that actually you can reach them because of line of sight.
Mm.
So you could actually still transmit outside the country, totally absent of the government's control of the internet.
Can you amplify those? Can you
You could do
amplify
that with repeaters. Yeah. So, and especially in a country like Iran that has a lot of high dramatic terrain, perfect
Yes.
situation for repeaters across the top of the ridge lines to just pass that signal from a major city to the border area.
Yeah,
So-
you got to. Are they
Go ahead.
doing that? I'm hoping, right? CIA, MI6, whoever.
Hopefully.
It's really
Yeah.
tough because those things are so obvious that if the regime, I mean, all you need is a small handheld device to figure out where that signal's coming from and direction find on it and destroy it, which is what they were doing with the antennas on roofs as well. There's just so many of them. So if you could flood the environment with these devices, the regime just wouldn't have the resources to stop it.
Could you
But
do
right
a
now, that's not the
drone
case.
version of a repeater?
You could, but that would require a lot of power.
I know we're geeking out here, or at least I am on the tactics of this, but I'm not a cyber expert by any stretch. But it seems like that would be one of the best things that the international community, including the United States, of course, could do to amplify what is clearly an organic, not fabricated uprising against the regime, right? So, I mean, and you're a very well published author, which is awesome. Can you explain? And sorry, Dee, I know you probably have some questions, but I just wanted to know
keep
this
going. I
because
love it.
I'm going to be yapping about this today. Like, what is the mechanism other than what we all know, IRGC, Besiege, etc., Quds Force, like the mechanism internal that keeps the regime in place, both by the counterintelligence and the action arm of that element, and are they any good? Because we've obviously saw direct strikes by Israel on individuals that they had, they were hosting, and clearly they've been infiltrated. What's your thought on that? And can you kind of give the listeners an idea just how they keep themselves in power with such a opposition?
Yeah, so this grip on power that we see today is kind of a long-term development that started in 1989 when the current Ayatollah took over from the original Ayatollah. And what happened was he consolidated power economically through these organizations called banyads, which are essentially kind of like quasi-religious charity organizations on paper. But what they do is actually funnel all the money the regime controls into these specialized entities. That's at one layer. And then below that are things like banks, state pension funds, overseas investment funds. So you think about, like, in the United States, we have private equity and hedge funds and things like that. The regime has something very similar to that are owned in the person of the Ayatollah. And one of them is called Setad, Setad, which is interesting to look into if you have time. There was a Time article, I think in the 90s, about Ayatollah Khamenei, about how he's potentially one of the richest human beings on earth, more than Jeff Bezos, because of his control over these banyads. And we're talking hundreds of billions of dollars. And there was actually a statement by the Minister of Finance in the regime's inner circle a few years ago, where he admitted that 20% of the black market in Iran is controlled by the IRGC. So if the government is saying 20% is controlled by the IRGC, you can only imagine what the real number is, right? And if they're controlling the black market and they're also controlling the regular commercial market, it's not about necessarily our conventional ideas about securitization of a state, which is what's causing repression. Instead, it's economic control of the state. So the reason fuel prices are high, the reason the Toman is devalued, the Real is devalued, the reason there's little water access, this is because the regime is controlling the economy rather than allowing actual government functions to move normally as they should. I could go into it very deeply, but I'll leave it there.
John, we had there was like a report maybe a few months ago, maybe 2-3 months ago about Iran and their the drought, the problem with their water. Is it really like just comes down to the regime like holding the spigot open or not in terms of like getting, because they were talk about moving the capital and stuff like that. Like it's like
Tehran.
Like just insane things that you can't even like. The scale of it is like unbelievable to even think about.
Yeah, so this is not a new issue. I mean, 2021, there was a huge protest movement. It was water shortage and labor issues and some other stuff. The problem is this infrastructure that is in the water system is poorly maintained. It's basically Shah era infrastructure that's not ever been updated. So you've got like rotting metal, you've got pipes clogged up, you've got poorly managed dams, because there's a lot of corruption in the government, obviously, right? So like the people that are supposed to be like technocrats that you'd want running these things are not running them. Instead, it's IRGC affiliated individuals who are either brainwashed or sympathetic to the regime as their number one qualification to be running a dam, right? So that's a big problem. Also, I can't remember how many decades, this is the worst drought Iran has had in decades, right? So they're already at a low water table. They're having issues with how the crops are being, like how the efficiency of the actual movement of water to grow crops is happening. You have to remember it's a very mountainous country, like we mentioned. There's very little kind of lowland, flatland with water access. So it requires extra infrastructure to actually move water from mountain to mountain. There's one navigable river in the entire country, the Karun River, where actual ships can move on. The rest of it are not navigable by large ships. So there's already like a environmentally low water level there. Combine that with corruption and with a drought, now you've got a recipe for water disaster, which is like one small component of the current protests.
So the next thing, of course, is what if we have catastrophic success? Oh, sorry, Jay. Just throw that out there. Maybe you have like the questions I'm getting is what comes next, right? Like what if there's reports that the Ayatollah is talking about fleeing to Moscow, etc. Like, what if the regime is decapitated? Is it just simply going to leave the IRGC as the presumptive power that will fill the vacuum? Is there any chance that it could be a formation of a government more friendly to the United States, the West, and being part of the community of nations? Is there any leader that actually has the clout to stand up and do that? Or are we basically going to move from a theocracy into, a military dictatorship?
Yeah, I think there's three possible outcomes, but I'll first put a pin on the thing about the decapitation. When we say decapitation, we're typically thinking about a person or a small group. So in this case, most people are thinking, well, if we kill Ayatollah Khamenei or he runs away to Moscow, the regime is decapitated. But there's a problem. It's like that whole problem framing concept in military planning. If we don't frame the problem correctly, we're going to be pursuing the wrong problem and the wrong solution the entire time. The thing is with the regime, when we say who's in charge, we're usually wrong. When we killed Salami, for example, the commander of the military, we thought that would decapitate the IRGC. It didn't, because he's not in charge. The people who are actually in charge are not big names. They're not on the news all the time. It's a small group of, they call them Sipahis or guardians, that are in the background that are controlling a lot of this stuff, not for ideological reasons as their number one reason. It's more about economic control and wealth generation for their inner circle. So if the Ayatollah left, I feel very little would change. And I'll go back to the three outcomes. One is that he leaves or dies. The second one is that the monarch returns. And the third one is that the IRGC takes over. These are very three, common potential outcomes. The most likely thing that will probably happen, and I'm not a future, predictor with a crystal ball, probably what would happen is the IRGC would take over. That third option is most likely. The reason for that is because the monarchy is not universally liked. even by people who want freedom in the country, because a monarchy doesn't really equal freedom. It just equals another way of consolidating power, which is what the revolution was about in the first place. A lot of the outside Iran support for inside Iran protests talk about the monarchy, and that does not correlate to what people want inside the country. And it's the people inside the country that ultimately have to live every day with what that next government is, right? So that's always a question of what do the people outside want versus what the people inside want. And we have to rectify those two desires in kind of trying to predict what might happen next and what the consequences are. And if the US or Israel is perceived widely by people in Iran that they were behind a regime change and the monarch came back, I feel like we'd probably run into a very similar problem that we had with the original Shah before he left, where there was this, widespread kind of consternation about who's actually running things in the country, even if the monarch was purely running it himself without foreign influence. If people doubted enough, you're going to lose that kind of support for that leadership.
Hey guys, I want to tell all of you today about a new newsletter that we're launching that encompasses both the Team House podcast, the Eyes On podcast, and the High Side news outlet, which I run with Sean Naylor. The newsletter is going to be once a week. It's going to come into your inbox, and you're going to get the most current podcasts on Eyes On and the Team House and whatever's topical or current on the high side. So it's another way for us to get the information out to you, as social media algorithms are pretty iffy and you never really know what you're going to get. So this is a once a week email. It'll slide into your inbox and it will have, the greatest hits of that week.
It's really good, man. I'm checking it out.
The website for it is teamhousepodcast.kit.com/join. teamhousepodcast.kit.com/join. You go there and you enter into your email list, or you enter your email into the little thing on the website, and you're good to go. And that'll be it. So we really appreciate your support and hope you'll consider signing up.
Where's the link?
The link will also be down in the description if you're looking for it there.
And that's teamhousepodcast.kit, K-I-T, Kilo India Tango.com/join.
Jay, what do you got? You were going to say something.
I was just going to ask, as far as the protests are concerned, do you think that the regime is willing to, is there a red line that the regime would not want the protest to cross before they increase the use of violence against the protesters, and what might that look like if they were?
I think the regime is acting in a state of fear and survival, and they're not using logic to calculate to your question about a red line. I think what they're doing is they're going to continue throwing assets at the problem to try to tamp down. And there's actually clear indications of that happening. Right now, they have Afghans actually manning checkpoints in eastern Iran. They have Hezbollah in Tehran marching down the streets, enforcing the law. They have Pakistanis, and they have some other foreign fighters that were working with the regime in Syria that are now in Iran, actually doing Basij-like law enforcement activity. They did this previously in, I think it was 2019 or 2017. It was 2017 during one of those protests. They had 5,000 Lebanese Hezbollah fighters patrolling the streets in Tehran. And I think you'll see something like that continuing, where rather than making a logical choice about what to do next, they're going to just continue throwing these foreign assets at it to try to tamp down.
And you answered my question, which was, what is their probable state of mind? And you said it's panic mode right now.
Yeah, they've been this way for a long time, and that's kind of been their main mode of behaving. Rather than thinking like a rational actor, they've been acting like someone with their back up against the wall, making very rash decisions about what to do next.
I mean, you do see what Khomeini's tweeting and stuff like that. He's tweeting like an absolute maniac. That doesn't sound like somebody who's really in control and locked into what's going on.
Yeah, and if I was the 90-year-old dictator and I was afraid that I might get deposed, I'd probably stay off of Twitter, because every time you hit send,
Yeah. Hey, gents, I got to jump real quick. I'll try to jump back on an unavoidable issue based on it's relevant.
Good luck. Mick's going to parachute into Tehran right now to assassinate the supreme leader. You heard it here first.
Bring me back some saffron.
Yeah. So I know you don't want to speculate, but like you said, like the IRGC is like, if you had to bet money, likely the IRGC is the one that would take over Iran. Also, the interesting thing I've seen, like over the last, it's been more than like the last few weeks of protests. It's been more like the last few months. Basically, ever since Israel and the U.S. hit Tehran, the nuclear sites, was like you see these kind of like puff pieces in American, like the Western media about the Shah. And how, and you know, you hear it on Twitter too, as these protests have continued to go on, where they're like, bring back the Shah, long live the Shah, and stuff like that. And it's like, dude, this guy's been outside of Iran for 50 years. Yeah. So it's like, there really is some like secret love for this guy to come back, or is that just what like Western powers really want?
You got to think about a lot of the Iranians that are, let's say, our parents' age, that are outside of Iran. They left Iran during the revolution. So like they grew up pro-Shah, left the country, kept their views, and now they're speaking. And their kids grew up like that too. So people that are our age or even younger grew up in that environment, like in California, for example, Los Angeles, a lot of pro-Shah stuff, because those were the people that left the regime or left the country and came to the United States. You know, that's what we have. Doesn't mean it's false support, but it may be overemphasized or over. It's not representing the actual sentiment, especially, like I said, inside Iran, like, because those are the people that will have to be dealing with the new government, if there is one, every day. And is that the government that they wanted in the first place? You know, and actually Iran, people think about Iran, they think like, oh, it's this centralized authoritarian system, whether it's a monarch or it's a Ayatollah. But Iran actually has had democracy twice in its recent century of history. 1906 they had a constitutional revolution, and then 1953 they had Mohammad Mossadegh, who was deposed by the CIA. Both of those times that people actually picked their government, and both times it was a democracy. So there is a big desire for that in Iran. The problem is, and I don't know if this crosses over to the Venezuela discussion, there's oil in Iran, and foreign interests in oil are always looking, and it's easier to manage a single authoritarian than it is to manage a democracy if you want the oil out of that country, right? And that's just rational, international relations concept. Like you want to have the simplest access to that resource. So whether it's the United States, Britain, Russia, or China, all of them have something in common, and that is they want the oil in Iran. And if that means that they need to keep a dictator or a monarch in power, they'll do it, because that means they get what they want.
It's interesting you said how folks that came from Iran like immigrated to the States and like, you know, maybe the UK and other places after during the fall. It mirrors a lot like Cuban immigrants, right, to the States, even like Greek immigrants to the States, right? Like a lot of them came over during like the junta and stuff like that. So there are those like, they kind of get stuck in time a little bit, right? And remember like the good old days before, without thinking what the actual people on the ground of whether it's Cuba, Greece, Iran, or take your pick really want for themselves. Yeah, if you have anything else on Iran, or Jay, if you have any questions on Iran,
I just
let them.
wanted to ask if you know what Israel's role on the ground might be, or even geopolitical as far as all this is concerned. What are they saying?
From my contacts inside Iran, the consensus or feeling is that Israel has deeply penetrated the IRGC and outside the IRGC, but still in the government, because there are some actual like secular components of the government. And I think that's probably true. And the question is, the ones who are infiltrated, are those the ones that will eventually take over? Or is there a separate element that will eventually take over? And it's really tough to say, because obviously when you're doing clandestine work, it's hard to manage that because it's clandestine. So you can't actually, answer every question about what your move might do, what the effect might be. I think it will be interesting, because if you look at who was assassinated in June, there was certainly a select deck of individuals who were killed, and then a select deck of peers who were not killed. And of course, doing some inferential analysis, you could question about why did they survive.
Let me ask you this, because we're relatively, it's understood that the Quds force and IRGC, obviously it protects Iran, and its main thing is to protect itself and the supreme, the Ayatollah. But like they're obviously deployed across the world. Are they pulling back in terms of like their covert stuff outside of Iran to like come back and be like, oh shit, we got to make sure things are covered at home.
Yeah, so it's important to distinguish between Quds Force, which is like a special operations element that does partner force training with their elite partner units, like in Syria previously, and the IRGC generally, which is much larger, because the IRGC also has an intelligence organization, which actually took over from we call it the MOIS, but they actually call it VAJA. So IRGC intelligence organization took over domestic intelligence activities from this other entity in 2009 after the Green Revolution, the Janbashi Sabs. And when they did that, they set up across every province an outpost. So there's IRGC intelligence organization all over the country. And there's also some other elements. There's actually quite a few other named elements that are supporting them on all these provinces. So Quds Force is still doing what Quds Force does because it's a foreign entity. Like they're supposed to only do stuff outside the country. Whereas IRGC intelligence organization is the one that's most concerning domestically and also regionally. So we call it IRGC IO. The IO is all over the place in like Azerbaijan, Armenia, Georgia, Turkey, Syria, like the ring around Iran, basically. Whereas Quds Force is much further out. They're in Latin America, they're in Africa, they're sometimes in the United States, not doing very well with their operations, but they try. So they're pretty widespread. Whereas it's the IO that's inside Iran that's causing a lot of this background collection. That's resulting in a lot of what they do is they'll disappear people to scare others. So you saw during the Masa Amini protests, what they would do is they would actually use Instagram to geolocate where the people were, and they'd go to their house and basically throw them off their rooftop to kill them that way, and then say that someone committed suicide. And like they would use this as a way to instill fear and kind of like make people think twice about stepping outside. But they've turned the internet off, so they can't use that tool very well right now.
Yeah.
So going back to what I was mentioning earlier, that's why they're probably releasing these images of people in the dead, essentially, is to try to achieve that same outcome.
Damn. Unbelievable what's going on. All right, yeah, let's flip to another oil-rich country, Venezuela, that last week, obviously everyone knows, we went in and snatched Maduro. He's 3 miles away from my house right now, relaxing in a Brooklyn detention center. Interesting thing this week, what happened, we saw President Trump with Secretary of State Rubio and some other folks from the administration meet with a roundtable of oil executives and the Halliburton executive. And I joked with you guys before the show started about how insane that would be if we did that in 2002 and 2003 when we went into Iraq. And now it just seems to be normal. Like this is like just normal operating procedure. And I kind of went down a rabbit hole in terms of like what's the deal with Venezuelan oil and how it's like heavy crude and it needs like serious refinement and that like Venezuela really isn't the infrastructure really isn't there. It needs like 5 to 10 years of like modernization for them to like make it cost effective. They get some precursor that goes into the oil to like thin it out from Russia. Like they don't really have a great infrastructure there. Also, the other part about the heavy crude thing is like heavy crude needs to be at $80 a barrel for it to make sense economically for Venezuela. Also, the whole thing about them having 300 plus billion of reserves was a number that Hugo Chavez came up with back in the early 2000s to like say, hey, we're a real deal player here. And that's the number that we've taken for the last 25 years as being true. Some people are saying that it could be a third of that. That's a lot of oil still, obviously, but it's not exactly like we could just go in there, stick a tap into the ground, and then we're rich all of a sudden because we have all this oil. Most of the oil execs at that round table, at least maybe they were offline, off the record, were talking like this doesn't really make sense for us economically. And most of them are actually more into it for getting their $10 billion for like the judgment that was levied against Venezuela when they pulled out, when they like nationalized the oil industry there. So it's just, I don't know what the fuck we're doing there is basically my point. So John, what do you got?
Yeah, so actually it's interesting, this situation with the oil, because it's, even though it feels regional, it feels local, it's actually international in scope, because we were just talking about Iran's oil as one thing. China has all these small teapot refineries, is what they're called. They're basically kind of like backyard oil refineries that are designed specifically to work with this kind of crude exactly. And what has been going on with a lot of Venezuelan oil is that it's been doing ship-to-ship transfers over to China and being refined by these very small-time, almost like entrepreneurial oil refineries, right? Well, the U.S. now controlling that, you have to think about what effect will this have on Chinese oil use? How will this affect China-Iran oil use? Because Iran is the number one provider of oil to China currently. Well, if there's a regime change in Iran and the U.S. now controls Iran and Venezuela oil production, what does that mean for China? Because if China's oil is coming from these two countries and the U.S. now controls it, the only other option is Russia. So this is just, I mean, I don't want to speculate on what could all these like third order effects, but that's a very interesting thing to think about internationally about what will happen just because of the change of control over the oil. Now with the crude oil, the U.S. is actually the only country that's able to truly commercialize what's currently in Venezuela, and that's why Chevron stayed there for so long. The problem is the infrastructure, of course, is breaking down. It's been breaking down for a long time. It was nationalized previously, so there's a lot of detritus in these processing pieces of equipment. But if the oil price, like you said, it needs to be $80 for it to be profitable, and right now it's in the 50s. Again, internationally, how is that going to affect OPEC? How is that going to affect Saudi Arabia and the Emirates, who we want to have on our side? Because if we push them out of this game, guess who they might start selling oil to? China, right? So like there's a lot of third order questions that pop out of this single act of taking over this oil.
Damn. So yeah, there's like a lot going on here. Like it's pretty unbelievable. Yeah, just this whole rabbit hole I went into about like going in, like, I still am trying to wrap my head around why the fuck we did it, right? Because like we play the role as like freedom and democracy coming to you soon, but we're dealing with Maduro's number 2 and number 3 in command, right? Like the Rodriguez siblings, who
And
have
Darcy.
been and who have been in the government for 20 plus years. They were part of Hugo, they came up with Hugo Chavez. So it's really interesting, like, how the veil has kind of been lifted a little bit. And I don't know if this is like what U.S. foreign policy has been all about for the last 50 years, but it kind of really seems like that's what it's been about for the last 50 years. Is in just imperialism, frankly. Sorry to talk like a pinko commie, but.
Well, we don't have the balancing force that we had with the Soviet Union previously, where there was like a second actor that could come in and affect what was happening, and we're currently sort of unrestrained or unipolar, I guess is the term to use. But there are no constraints, there are no repercussions, which no matter actually who is in office, because if you look during the Obama administration, the Predator drone was used exponentially more than it was during the Bush administration, right? That's one example. And the things we were doing in Syria, like you would never imagine we'd be doing that in Syria if the Soviet Union was still around, right? So because there are no checks on that, regardless of who is in power in the United States, the U.S. as a country internationally is going to act in an unconstrained way until there is a constraint placed on it.
Mick, you're back. Glad to see you.
Back. The Middle Eastern media's heads start collectively exploding.
Oh, really? Why? Did something new happen?
All the reports are coming out now that, obviously the White House is considering these strikes, and according to them, the decision point or the options brief will be Tuesday, and a decision will be made. I don't know that to be true. Just passing on. I think they were citing Reuters. So I know we moved on to Venezuela, but
yeah. We talked about the crazy roundtable of oil executives and Halliburton, which again would be unbelievable to see if this was 20 years ago.
Do the oil executives really want access to Venezuela? I say that not as a statement, a genuine question. I'm not an energy expert.
I think the only company that was like really down for it was Chevron, because I think ConocoPhillips has like a big deal with Guyana, and they have the same kind of heavy crude that Venezuela does, and it's more developed and stuff like that. So there isn't this real, I mean, obviously people are going to want to make money, but there isn't like this huge rush as people would think that there would be to get this Venezuelan heavy
We're talking
crude.
like a decade-long infrastructure build to make this effective, right? So this is a long-term commitment by these companies that may or may not last policy-wise beyond the next 3 years.
Yeah. Also, like, what's the situation on the ground, like in terms in Venezuela, right? Like, how are you going to protect these assets? You know, you're going to
Yeah.
drop $100 billion of investment, and maybe in 5 years the country looks different, and they say fuck off again. You know, which frankly, if you ask me, that's like within their rights to do because it's their country and it's their resources. But why would anybody with you know, if I want to be profitable, if I'm an investor or an oil company, why would I dump billions of dollars in fixing infrastructure if there's like a maybe there?
Right. And is it just, and we're going to keep the regime in place by paying part of this to them? And what's the difference between, you know, this and what was going on before, essentially? I mean, the U.S. used to promote democracy around the world, right? And we actually recognize that Edmundo Gonzalez won the 2024 election. Like that's official policy right now by the United States. So we're going to try, and I know it's much easier
It doesn't
said than
seem
done,
like de facto policy, to be honest.
right?
You know,
Like, why aren't we forcing them to either let them be the interim government or hold another election?
it's
Free and
because
fair
The
election.
State
Machado.
Department just went there and met with the current government.
Yeah, right. So we're basically propping them up, which is just that the Maduro government minus Maduro,
Yeah.
right?
You guys know anything about the Collectivos that are on the ground in Venezuela? Can I get a little bit of info on that?
Well, like most regimes, their primary purpose is to stay in power, right? So the Collectivos, a paramilitary group that's kind of like a common, at least how it's been described to me, a combination of a security force, a cartel, a gang, a street gang. They are basically affected because they're extraordinarily violent and they have no restraints when ordered. So that would make it very challenging, to reinsert Maria Machado. Of course, I think that's a fair point. But essentially locks down everything and anyone at the direction of the Minister of Interior, who's one of apparently the most powerful leader that's there. It's not under our system, of course, but under their system, it's about the regime security. So that individual has a lot of clout, much more so than the acting president.
All right. I think that's all I got for Venezuela. Unless I'm missing something, you guys can hit me up. I mean, it looks like another fucking quagmire, to be completely honest. And it doesn't seem like we're at all promoting democracy at anywhere. We don't really give a fuck about that. We just care about who agrees with us and does what we want them to do. Another, in the Western Hemisphere, Greenland, there's talk about, invading Greenland or paying citizens of Greenland $100,000 to like become American citizens, which were like, why the fuck would you do that? Because $100,000 would just go to your medical bills if you became an American. So what's the incentive?
Or your
in that?
veterinarian bills.
Yeah, or that. Yeah, exactly. If we were to ever try and take over Greenland, obviously it would be easy militarily. That's the one thing we're good at is fucking other people's militaries up. What comes after is usually where we fucking stumble. What happens to NATO as a alliance?
Ceases
Riddle
to
me that.
exist.
Right.
This is hard to believe we're even talking about. It's it started as like, oh, he's just bloviating too.
He's just dotty and old. Yeah.
I mean, where to start, right? So Greenland, we have like 3 treaties with Greenland to include the NATO treaty, right? And they've during the Cold War, we had many bases and many people. It's strategically important. Yes, that's true. It's like the interceptor point for, intercontinental ballistic missiles coming our way. Apparently somebody told me it's like the apogee or whatever the top of the trajectory is right under it. So it's the easiest place to strike it. So that's definitely true. It's also, we're seeing Arctic ice cap melt. So the access to hydrocarbons and rare earth minerals are more prevalent. And then if you look at the globe and just flip it like this, once that's the case, the world gets a lot smaller. So obviously it's strategically important. So is everything that touches the Arctic. That said, the aforementioned treaties allow us to do everything that we're saying that we need to do, that we're not doing right now. Like if it's that big of a security issue and Russia and China are just circling Greenland, which they're not, then why aren't we there? Like, why did we degrade or reduce our presence to like 100 folks in one base. So the question is, if it's that important to, why aren't we doing something about it now? Why aren't American companies in there full throttle looking how to exploit this? So that is one issue on whether this is really about the things that we are saying it is. And then the second issue is just the damage this is doing to the United States' reputation to even talk about it. Under the UN Charter, you cannot obviously use threat against another nation. You can't even threaten it. So we're already past that. We're threatening, because they won't take it off the table, which is a threat, to use military force against a NATO partner. So we're clearly in the wrong internationally on this. It is, I mean, you're seeing reports that NATO, I mean, European countries are going to start sending forces there. And you know why they're doing it? They're going to say, well, you said it's under threat. So now the UK, Germany, and France are going to send forces potentially, of course, Denmark as well, to Greenland right now, to bolster this perceived threat of Chinese and Russian invasions. And that's going to, of course, just escalate it because it's going to irritate the White House. And we'll see where it goes from here. But the other part of this, and I'd love to hear what you guys think about this is clearly against the treaties that the U.S. signed, which is against U.S. law. So how the military would even entertain or prepare for an invasion is a question I would have, because it's clearly an unlawful order to invade a NATO treated ally per the U.S. law that established our presence in NATO, unless we withdraw, which I think takes Senate action, not just unilateral executive action. So I'll stop there. Toss it to you.
I think also thinking about Article 5, the only time it was used was in Afghanistan, right? And I was thinking back when I was deployed there in the same base I was on, we had Danish special forces with us. We actually used their chow hall, We have Danish special forces partnered in Ghana right now with US SOF, training the Ghanaian military, their special boat service. There's active US work with the Danes overseas. And I can't imagine how it must be for those teams on the ground working together, watching this happening and looking at each other, because it could potentially be that the next morning you wake up and suddenly we're enemies in the same camp. It's just crazy.
It is crazy. And they're very effective. And quite frankly, I've stood at a dignified transfer for one of them. And I think this is really rubbing, not that, they're taking this into account, veterans, especially of Afghanistan, the wrong way, because this is not the way you talk and treat allies. And as Jonathan said, the only time Article 5 has been initiated has been to our benefit. And a lot of these countries sat in Afghanistan, even Iraq, which I don't even know what it had to do with 9/11, for decades. And the Danes specifically, per capita, I think was one of the highest casualty rates per capita of any of us.
And as crazy as us having even talk about this is, it also begs the equally crazy question. Could this be a ploy by this administration to drive a wedge in NATO? They've already made it clear that they don't think it's effective anyway. So what would stop them from using this or even bringing this to the table just to drive wedges and form cracks in NATO to try to ultimately get it to pull itself apart?
Good point. And it's doing it. It's working.
If that's a real plan within the administration, I mean, we're actively working for Russia's benefit then, because NATO
just withdrew like 100 treaties out of the UN. We just pulled out of them this past week.
Good God, guys!
And let's
I
go
need a
back a
feel-good
bit.
story.
This whole
Go ahead.
world order was established by us after World War II for our benefit. Like, we're going to write this order and we're on top of the order, right? That's a good thing. That's why the U.S. economy is the number one in the world. It wasn't by accident, right? And the U.S.'s power is its friends and its ability to coordinate and form alliances that matter to everybody in the alliance. The NATO alliance is the most significant, I think, military alliance in history, I think one could argue. And it benefited us, right? So if we rupture NATO, I think I don't know if they're accurate, but like you're seeing some statements out of European leaders that they're already looking at how to shut down U.S. bases.
I was going to
And
mention that. There was
Yeah.
an EU minister that was like
Hmm.
popping off on the radio somewhere. I don't remember his name, so apologies. Where he was like, if this were to go down in Greenland, like, we're going to kick you guys out of every single base you guys are in. We're more than happy to take it over. I mean, listen, getting all the European countries to do the same thing at once, I mean, whatever. We'll see if that happens. But even if it happened in Italy or Germany. Or wherever, take your pick, wherever there's U.S. bases, that's a real, like, you'd never heard something like that from the Europeans always take things into consideration and they huddle and they talk about stuff and they come out with a really cool statement, but like, that's like real PC. But frankly, I kind of like to see them have a little bit of teeth and like bite back against this administration, because this administration seems to not give a fuck about Europe.
Might not have a choice. And remember, all the things that have to happen to do it. I mean, if you do it by force, here's one issue. I don't think the United States, the American citizen, is going to want to view its country as a neo-colonial power. That's right. So I think you'll get refusing orders for real then. And I also think that at the end of this term, whoever comes next is probably going to give it back. Right? Because it was taken by force. So there's no like treaty, law, none of that. I just don't see it happening. So I wish we wouldn't have to talk about it, because it sounds like just a ridiculous idea. I think the Senate would step in and cut off all funding for it. I really do. I looked at comments from senators. The only one I saw that was really significant was
Lindsey
talking
Graham?
about buying it, right? So take the force off the table, even though it's not technically off the table, and look at the buying part. Well, to buy it, it would have to, it's still part of Denmark, so they would have to agree. And then Greenland has to agree. And Greenland gets a lot of support from Denmark. Right? They have a total, basically socialist system. All their healthcare, all their education, way more than they contribute. Unless the United States wants to give more to the people in Greenland than they give to the people in Montana or New York.
Greenland's almost like Kentucky.
Yeah. Then we can't match it. Nor do they. And it's clear they don't want to be part of the United States.
Why would you want to be part of the United States? Seriously, right? Why would you want to be?
I mean, they don't. So
no, if you're Greenland, perennially,
they're doing pretty good. The other part is then the Senate. It has to be a treaty. So the Senate has to pass the treaty to actually purchase Greenland, and the House has to pass the appropriations to buy it. Does anybody? I'm not an expert on the acquisition of foreign countries, but I think that's a heavy lift that it's never, and there's no interest. Nobody else in the Senate has talked about this until now. So the idea that they want to purchase, and that, I'm obviously an old school Reagan type Republican here, but the current thinking of MAGA is the opposite of this.
Right.
It's more on the isolationist side. It's not in the neo-colonial, let's take over, territory from allies. So I just don't see how this.
I mean, if I was a MAGA bro about America first, I'd be pretty fucking pissed about seeing what's going on in the last few months. Gonna be honest.
But everything I'm seeing on social media and TikTok and YouTube and all that, they're screaming that hey, President Trump, what happened to America first? Like, I've seen people full on who, when I first started watching them, were all about this administration, and in the last 6 months or so have completely turned on them. Completely. So I think it's gone beyond them. I think them playing to their base was for votes. And then once they got into office, it was, screw you, we're going to do what we want. We don't care whether you like us or not.
But there's representatives in the House and the Senate that, hopefully they have their own agency. And they are. I mean, you're seeing some pretty significant.
You think so?
I hope so. This would require
anyway.
Yeah, exactly. This might not help them on the mid. And I don't do politics, and I don't belong to a party, but I'm just looking at this from the national security perspective, like the U.S., not either any party. This is not in our national security interest. Even the discussion is seriously fraying our alliances, and I don't know if it's recoverable. I mean, I guess I'd ask anybody that's listening, think if you were a European leader right now? Like, what would you be doing?
I would be doing
Especially
anything
if
I
the
can to
dollar
get
is
away
your
from
reserve
us.
currency.
Yep. Yeah. There's a lot of economic things that they could do, right? They could, like the whole bond market is it depends on foreign leaders, foreign decisions, right? This could just not go well for the United States. It's already not going well for the United States. I wish we would just move on. I support plenty of the things that they've done. Not plenty, but some. I try to call it objectively, but this is objectively a terrible idea even to talk. And I don't think we're going to do it, which makes the talk even worse.
Yeah, Mick, I would agree with you. I mean, anybody with a normal functioning brain would agree with you, but you see officials from the administration going on news channels and spinning this as a good idea. Actual card-carrying members of the administration going out there and
never said this before, right? So
right.
It's never been an issue. Apparently, we got the Virgin Islands with some deal. Like, we agreed never to make a claim on Greenland, and they gave us the Dutch Antilles or something like that. And that is why we have the U.S. Virgin Islands. Like, if it's just going to be a might makes right, what's the famous quote? The strong do what they will, and the weak do what they must. Yeah, right. Thucydides, yeah. That looks like the new foreign policy of the United States, and that has not been the United States, I think, ever. Certainly after we came to prominence after the end of, or during World War II, but certainly after. It's in our interest to be the leader of the free world. Not the
all right, boys.
Torment.
We got anything else? I'm not feeling good about this conversation. I'm not going to lie to you.
Is that what we do here?
No, never. I almost never feel good about our conversations after. I want to thank Jonathan.
Yeah, can you tell us something about your book, man? By the way, if
please.
You send me one, I'll put it right here.
Oh, perfect. Yeah, I'll send you it.
Everybody on a lot of my buddies do that write books. My Stoic buddies and my national security buddies, because it's the same view as ABC. Don't tell them that.
Yeah, it's right here above my shoulder. It's called Iran's Shadow Weapons, and it's about how they use covert action in intelligence operations, both overseas and inside the country, to achieve their foreign policy objectives. And it's unique because it's based on a bunch of stuff I got declassified for the first time. So a lot of it's former CIA cables, a lot of intelligence reports. Also, I translated a bunch of stuff out of Farsi that was from the regime itself that's been leaked to the public, and a lot of new analysis using those two sources that people never get to see. So it's almost a third of the book is just references, because I put a ton of actual analytical horsepower behind it. My idea was to kind of create like an open source product that you would hope to see on the other side of the green door, but with materials available to the public.
Yeah,
thanks.
I'm gonna put a link in the description for that. So if anyone's interested, please grab it there. Also, Jonathan's other book as well about irregular warfare. And Mick Mulroy, he's got a podcast called The Pub and the Porch, Applied Stoicism. Check that out. Those links are in the description. Jason Lyons, links are in the description. Muscles from Brussels, Andy Milburn's links are also in the description. And the best way to support the show is joining our Patreon. You get both Team House and Eyes On episodes ad-free and early, and you help support the show. You can go to patreon.com/teamhouse. Any and all information is in the link. The links are in the description. John, as always, thank you, man.
Awesome.
This was great. Mick, Jason, you two, awesome. We'll obviously keep an eye on Iran and what happens. We'll keep you guys posted. Thanks a lot, guys.
Thanks, gents.
Excellent.
Yeah, thanks,
gents.
I want to tell all of you today about a new newsletter that we're launching that encompasses both the Team House podcast, the Eyes On podcast, and the High Side news outlet, which I run with Sean Naylor. The newsletter is going to be once a week. It's going to come into your inbox, and you're going to get the most current podcasts on Eyes On and the Team House and whatever's topical or current on the high side. So it's another way for us to get the information out to you, as social media algorithms are pretty iffy and you never really know what you're going to get. So this is a once a week email. It'll slide into your inbox and it will have, the greatest hits of that week.
It's really good, man. I'm checking it out.
The website for it is teamhousepodcast.kit.com/join. teamhousepodcast.kit.com/join. You go there and you enter into your email list, or you enter your email into the little thing on the website, and you're good to go. And that'll be it. So we really appreciate your support and hope you'll consider signing up.
Where's the link?
The link will also be down in the description if you're looking for it there.
And that's teamhousepodcast.kit, KIT, Kilo India Tango.com /join.